black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
I go around the world and I ask blacks in various countries. I said, two people stand up any place in the room. I'll give you $1,000 if you can tell me what racism is. I've never ever had one that knew what racism was. Never had one. I said, what is racism? He said, well, it's bigotry, it's hatred, it's not getting along with people, it's bias, it's discrimination. All that wrong. Racism has nothing to do with getting along with people and liking people. Racism is a competitive relationship between groups of people who are competing for the ownership and control of resources, wealth, and power. That's what racism is. Racism never existed on the earth until the 1500s, when all of a sudden 9 European nations decided to use black labor, black bodies, and black wealth out of Africa to get in a race. After Columbus had discovered America, supposedly, in quotes, in 1495, all of a sudden they got a rush to redevelop the Western world. So all these countries were in a race, a contest, competing to see who can develop North America, Central America, and Latin America. It was a race. It was a race, and everybody was in the race but black folk. Black folk never participated in the race. You were the prize, the boot, the loot that they used to empower themselves.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I'd like to welcome you to this current edition of the show. For those of you who are new to the show, the Umoja Circle is an African-centered talk show where we tend to correct errors where errors are found and introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. I believe, and I truly do, for all these years I've been doing this show, that only through dialogue can there be a shift in consciousness. And when there's a shift in consciousness, there will be an automatic shift in your world. And I hope every time I produce one of these shows that there is a shift in your consciousness by the contents that I try to utilize. I always emphasize books, as you can see. Every day, every time you see my show, you'll see books in front of me, which kind of bolster some of the things that I talk about. I've introduced to people who watch my show various great scholars that have influenced me, like Dr. Clark or Naeem Akbar. And also, I think the person that you saw before I came on the air, Dr. Claude Anderson, a great economic professor, what he said and the topic he said, talked about, is what I'm going to be talking about today. Okay, the fact is that many of us, like he said, have this erroneous definition of racism. I don't know about you, but I'm a baby boomer. So when I went to school, there was things we talked about prejudices. You know, we were told about discrimination and those words. But in the last 30 years or so, I noticed that there's been a contraction of the word racism with prejudice, or you are racist, when they should say you are being prejudiced. Okay, racism has nothing to do with the human foibles of prejudices, okay, biases. These are all part of the human nature. Racism is not the same, as Dr. Anderson said so brilliantly, and that's why I started with that video clip of him explaining what racism is. And I see how frustrated he is, as I am, when I see that it's being used today in the wrong context, okay? And I'm gonna say something now that I hope will prove by the end of this two-part series that by the evidence and the definitions that I will be saying. I will say this: when I see somebody white talking to a brother or sister, a black person in America, and say you are being racist, they are totally wrong. Black people cannot be racist. So I know some of you who have been conditioned by the system, like I'm saying, and Dr. Claudia Anderson who said, you cannot be racist if you're black or brown or one of the groups that have been affected by colonization and all these other things, because you have to be the dominant group and use the systems created by the dominant group in order to be the equivalent of racism. And I'm gonna explain it as we go along. I got a couple of. I'm gonna use some of my some of the stuff that I've discovered, and I'm gonna share with you my thinking as we go along. For example, I want to let those of you who are familiar with the show know this, but those of you who might not know this here at the Umoja Circle, there are a number of reasons why I always incorporate past events in our that happened in our history here in America as people of African descent to help in my discussion pertaining to today's issues within the African American community. That's the premise of the show: correcting errors where errors are found and introducing facts where we find so many people working on fiction. And when I talk about a system like racism, I'm gonna give you historical facts so you can understand, because it puts the light on the present moment. That's what history does. And you got to understand the precedent, how it got to this point, and how it was changed from the system is trying to, and it's not being done coincidentally. It's a deliberate thing, and I'll prove as I go along. Let me go to the next thought here. We are never disconnected from our past. It never goes away. It operates right here and right now in our minds, okay? We're not disconnected from it. For example, I parked my car before I came here. Right now, I'm presently, in the present moment, I'm in front of this camera talking to you. In order for me to get up from where I am and go to the parking lot and find my car, I have to go into the past, because I parked it in the past. If I didn't have that kind of historical data in my mind, then I would not be able to leave this spot. If for some reason one of these lights hits me in the head and I get amnesia, I don't remember who I am, I don't even remember where I live, would I be able to function? So we are never disconnected from the past. In fact, whether you know it or not, we use the past just to function as human beings, okay? Where's my car? How do I get back to my house? All those things are historical data that I have to use to function in the present moment. I want you to understand that context. So whoever, like I said in this book, that's not up here, but many of you might have read the book in high school or in college. It's called 1984, okay? Big Brother's watching you, okay? And one of the lines that I always like to use from that book to reiterate what I'm saying: whoever controls the images and information of the present will determine how future generations view their past. So there's a reason why you got the conservative movement, the MAGA movement, trying to pull books out of schools, historical books, Black history books, because there is a fear that if you really understand the past, you will be awakened to the truth of how you're being manipulated in the present moment. Okay, let's go on with this discussion. So I want to talk about, okay, this is one of the things about the past that we got to understand, and what it has to do with, I'm building up to why racism exists and what is racism. But again, I have to go to the past and build a foundation, historical data. Since the Emancipation Proclamation, because of Jim Crow segregation / apartheid, because that's what it really is, was an apartheid system after 1865, most of our people have been bottom stuffed in the society by racism. Racism is again, the word is a system. First of all, it came out of an economic system. The economic system that racism came out of was enslavement. We were property. People that look like me, and many of you out there, we were property. We were owned, okay? And it's our value, the value came from our work, our labor. That's where the value of the property. When somebody owned a plantation, it was nothing but bushes and maybe forests, but it was the labor of the enslaved humans that were property to those white owners that gave value to the land. It was the labor of planting and plowing and gardening and the carpentry and all the things that built America. Even a building like the White House was built by slave labor, non-compensated labor. And when you have, in a capitalist system, have labor which produce a product that you get sold in a market, and you don't have to pay the workers, that extra money that came from that labor is what is called profit. So when you hear the word profit, somebody had to work to produce that item or items, okay? And those who own the factory or the land, or whoever owned those things, the capitalist person, that's where their profit margin comes from, the labor of the people, okay? Today, some people get compensated by getting a paycheck. Not enough. That's why I try to keep it low. That's why you need unions, but that's another show, to make sure you get a working labor. But for 246 years, people of African descent that look like me were non-compensated. And then when the 13th Amendment came out, okay, by law, okay, the people who control those systems, the political system, the economic system, the military system, all these systems that was created and controlled by whites who made the economic benefits. And when you controlled the economic benefits, then you can manipulate it, because racism is embedded in the word racism is the word race, and is where one race who gets all the economic benefit from a system is able to manipulate that system with that wealth in order to control another group of people. That had nothing to do with your human biases or human prejudices. It's a system established by law. And this is what I'm going to be emphasizing as we go along. And it's passed down from generation to generation culturally. Let's go on to the next point. Okay, another thing that I like to quote is great scholars, that I've read about, and I always use this quote a lot on this show throughout the years. And for those of you, I hope it makes sense in context of what I'm talking about. The actions of the founding community, like colonial times in America, okay, that's what I'm talking about, become the experience of a generation. Those people that we read about in the past during the colonies, okay, when you had the Virginia colonies or the New England colonies that were produced, okay, their experience, those choices that they made and how they communicate with the native people and what happened in 1619 become the experience of that generation. And the experience at that one generation then becomes the history of the next generation. Their kids, their grandchildren, their great-great-grandchildren, those founding generations become historical figures, okay? And that's who you learn in school, and that's what you're taught in school, if you are in the dominant group. And getting all the wealth so you can produce the mythologies that are necessary for you to produce a particular generations who believe, again, whoever controlled the images and information of the past will determine how people think of that past, while the history of the many generations that follow becomes the tradition of that people, okay? So guess what we're being taught in school, what I was taught in school, about George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and, Thomas Jefferson. I got this mythology about those founding generations that does not fit the history and experience of my people, or people of African descent. But we only got this one narrow view based on the dominant group. That's how racism works. It's not something that come out naturally. It's a deliberate thing. It's about controlling and manipulating. Okay, so let's go on to the next. The meaning of the words that end with the suffix isms, as in classism, sexism, and racism, okay, is defined. This means to keep the prevailing conditions or predominant conditions. In other words, let nothing change. So when we talk about racism, when we talk about sexism, when we talk about classism, It's the dominant group, or who's working, who that system is working for, who wants to maintain that, and they usually do it by laws. Whether you in a classism system like they have in England and France during the times of the kings and the queens, they would produce laws that would maintain their status quo. Okay, their class structure. Okay, sexism. You know, women just got the right to vote in the early 20th century. Okay, but the male population that dominated them, and the black people that they dominated, okay, out of racism. It's the power, economic power that was generated by the use of these folks to produce the power and to maintain power. That is racism, okay? Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, like I said earlier, when we talked about the traditions of the people, okay, the founding generation, their experience becomes the history of the next generation, the children who read about them and learn about them, and their grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. By the time those traditional actions, this is how we treat other people. This is who I am. I'm white. There's a law that says I have the right to own black people. You were not the founding generation, but you were in a society, in a system that was by law, you know, produces your behavior. If you don't think laws go from generation to generation, think about this. Okay, let's leave that up there. I want you to, you know, I'll get to the culture that is developed. We have a racist culture in America that we're still dealing with it. It's embedded in the culture. That's my point, okay? And that's the point I want you to understand, okay? If you stop at a stoplight, okay, you don't even think about it right now. You don't even, you go automatic, a red light comes on, which was created by a black man, just for your point of view, Morgan. But anyway, you will automatically stop without thinking. But that law was passed 100 years ago more, okay, when the automobile was brand new and they had to control, it served the purpose. But the culture of driving that we have today was produced by law. And there's certain behaviors that generations later, you know, we got kids who are getting their license now who wasn't born in the early 1900s, but they're stopping at stoplights. They're conditioned to a particular behavior. There were slave codes, you know, that were produced in those founding generations that produced the behavior that still exists, because you are taught, if you're white in this America, that you are a dominant group. I'm not saying that makes you bad, but I'm saying that you got to understand that you are conditioned by laws that existed 200 years ago or more, actually 400 years. And it became part of the culture. And it takes time to disavow yourself of these cultural thinkings. This is what I put up there with what is the culture. Okay, culture is the sharing of beliefs, customs, and expectations. Okay, you expected to be treated a certain way if you were conditioned as a white male or female for hundreds and hundreds of years that you are the dominant group. If you see your images, if you see Tarzan in the early 20th century in Africa, this pale white gentleman who controlled the black people who've been there for thousands of years, and they look up to them, and Hercules is white, God is white, Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor is white. This is the kind of conditioning that if you're in that dominant group and you have laws that gives you privileges within that, whether you use it or not, whether you think it's wrong or not. There were white people in the 1800s called, you know, who were against enslavement, but didn't mean the laws were not there. Didn't mean that they had to deal with their consciousness in order to override their condition from childhood. Okay, some of them are called abolitionists. All right, they did exist. A culture produces a certain way of thinking. That's my point, of how you approach the world, or how you allow the world to approach you. Culture is a way people classify and catalog the world. And if you have laws that tell you you are dominant over a particular group, as in slave codes, if you have a 12-year-old has inherited 200 slaves from your father that on a plantation in South Carolina or in North Carolina, how are you going to grow up in that society where you have that kind of privilege? Okay? How are you going to function? You're going to manipulate that system, and that system, the way you manipulate that system is called, that's the term what racism is. That's my point, where black people cannot be racist. You have to be the dominant group in the system that is part of what you are functioning in your daily life, okay? Let's go on to the next point. Culture also gives people a framework for thinking, okay? Culture helps structure our thought process. Culture, that thing that's passed down from generation to generation, that is studied historically from generation through generation, that is performed in your actions because you are taught in the 1950s and the 1940s and the 1920s and 30s and the 1800s that you could not allow a black person to drink at a water fountain or come into your store. You're an everyday person, but by law, you're conditioned to say, get the heck out of here, okay? You know? Or you are lynching a black person because you are conditioned to believe that every time he looks at a white woman, he's going to do something harmful. You are conditioned by a law that became part of a culture. You don't know why you do that, but you saw your dad do that. You saw your grandfather act that way. You heard what they said at the dinner tables. Culture helps structure our thought processes, our way of thinking as a group of people. So therefore, our behavior within a society is shaped by the culture, but the culture is shaped by the law. The law that was produced. That's what I want you to understand. You're conditioned to think a certain way. Let's go on. And we transmit our minds culturally the same way that we transmit genetic information biologically, okay? It's passed on from generation to generation. This is how racist ideas are passed on generation to generation to generation. We all carry the minds of those who came before us, preceded us. Understand this truth. Let's go on. Cultural racism's social influence is achieved by shaping of human behavior within a society. For example, through the establishment of rules and behavior, like I said, or laws, okay, that continue to stop at the stoplight, okay, or know your boundaries, or know that you can't just take something off a shelf without paying it. There's a law that conditions you to be like that. I'm not saying laws are bad, but the type of laws. And if you're the dominant group who have a racist society that you created by laws, 3/5 of the human being, the Edict of Maryland in 1639 that said no matter what black folks do, they do not reap the fruits of their labor in our colonies. It's actually an edict called the Edict of 1639. The one drop rule was another one that came out of Virginia. One drop, you know how you hear the controversy is going on whether Vice President Harris is black. Well, according to in the context of the United States and the traditions of the one drop rule, if your grandparent was black, okay, you are considered black in this culture. Understand the history. I got a book here right now. If you just focus on this book, it's called Passing, okay, where black folks under that, who would be defined as black under that one drop rule, and how they had to maneuver through white America's racist society. This is a movie coming out about this book here, okay, by Neil Larson. It's called Passing, and that's another one of those issues that you got to come out of a racist society that we still not dealing with. You got black people who could pass for white, okay? So we got to understand that racism and enslavement and these underlying structures of the United States is still with us. The past is never away from it. We are embedded in the past, and all our traditions and all our behaviors come out of the past. It's with us right now. Every kind of tick, every kind of way, what you like, what ice cream you like, what kind of food you like, is based on past experiences. The present is always embedded in the past. Let's go on. Culture then involves following a set of rules and procedures in order to meet the needs of the individual within that culture. But those needs and individuals are shaped by the laws, what you can do. Black people's needs were not built, even though we were said by the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment, we were citizens of the United States. But because of black codes that came out from the time of 1870s, after the betrayal of 1877, when those white liberals of the North gave up on us because they were tired. They're still white, even though they might be the sons and daughters of abolitionists of the early 1800s and the 1700s, but they decided that they had enough, and they just said to the South, when Tilden versus Rutherford Hayes, they made an agreement that we will just, let you do what you want to do in the South. We will remove the troops, and black people caught hell for another 100 years. Thus, Martin Luther King, and when he said that the non-sufficient sum of money, you wrote a check that was said that you wrote a check for non-sufficient funds. You owe us, because that was in 1963. The war ended in 1865. And the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment were passed afterward, and we still had to deal with racist systems, okay? Following a set of rules. The rules are laws. Let's go. That shapes the world that we live in. Let's go on. Like culture, racism is also a social structure, which is shaped by the ideas, rules, and procedures that built the social structure that are founded in that society. Black codes again, and before that was slave codes, and we still did that. America had an apartheid before South Africa. Let that be known to you. It started in the 1800s. After 246 years of uncompensated labor, non-paid labor, and that's how we were left when we were so-called freed by the 13th Amendment and given citizenship by the 14th Amendment. But we were still not freed economically. Okay, I'm gonna go on to maybe one more before I stop at this one. And if that culture does not meet the needs of a certain group within that society, that cultural structure needs to be transformed, okay? And that's what black people and other groups within this society, to include white women, have been doing since 1789, when they wrote the Constitution. We still have work to do. You can still see it in the type of things that you're hearing from many of us in the black community, in the brown community, and with women's rights and all that's going on right here in 2024. But I'm gonna stop it right here, and I hope you understand, and we'll continue. This is gonna be part one. I'm gonna go on to part two. So until next time, peace, Hotep, bye-bye.